Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? Hi, I'm Nathan Mercero, CEO of Planning Alternatives. We're a disruptive brand in the financial planning space with a point of view that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Growing up in a small town in Canada, I experienced examples of families with money and without. It started me on this journey of understanding wealth and the idea that spending a day in a canoe with someone could be one of the best investments you could make. Join me as I sit down with leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, rule breakers, and friends to discover their perspective of true wealth. And maybe you'll start to shift yours. Well, I'm excited today to be joined by Kate Adams of Conscious Capitalism. Kate works with CEOs, boards, senior leaders, helping them strengthen their organizations and how they perform. Kate has a book coming out shortly, Accountability Under Fire, and it's going to be available exploring how society is demanding more from business and what great leaders are doing about it. So, Kate, welcome to Day in a Canoe. I know we had a little chat before we hit the record button about what's going on in your world, being in Washington, D.C., getting ready to head back home for a little while. Maybe you can just give us an overview of what has been your life journey so far.
Yeah, hi, Nathan. Thanks for having me. Gosh, my life journey. So the main things really, I grew up in the UK. I have found myself living here in the US for the last 3 years, which has been an amazing adventure. And I think the bit about my story that's probably most interesting is the common thread is always people. So when I think about how I grew up in the UK, I was really obsessed with and curious about how people perform, how people manage through life. I think it was probably informed my childhood. My eldest brother has cerebral palsy. And so I've grown up in this world of what is the potential of people and what do people do with the power and influence that they have. So I started my working career in what the US call human capital consulting. So how much do people contribute to the performance of an organization? And I guess in the most brutal terms, they're both the asset and the liability for an organization. And then I pivoted my career to actually starting to work in leadership roles in organizations that impact society more. So how do you lead organizations where their mission is to try and solve a societal problem? So how do you help people outside of organizations? And then latterly have decided that if you want to pull the biggest lever of change in how organizations, whether they are private sector, public sector, nonprofits, how they best drive progress in society, then it's about getting to the leaders and how they lead. So I spent the last few years doing that. And yes, a lot of that has culminated into a book which is called Accountability Under Fire. And it's really looking at the role of stewardship of leadership. So the fact that business is an economic force, and rightly so, a very strong economic force that so many of us have benefited from, but the belief it's also a societal force. And how do we ensure that leaders are able to fulfill that? So those that often see it can't always enact it. So how do we help leaders in this kind of challenging role and complex role they have to actually see the societal force that they are and deliver on it?
Sounds like very important work. Now, I am curious what your view is of the human capital side in this age of technology as we see AI advancing and there's more development of process and programs, and it seems to be putting some pressure on the human capital side. What's your read on where we're at in the culture today?
Yeah, it's really important. And actually, my view when it comes to leadership, especially at the moment, and accountability is there's never been a time when so many leaders are making so many influential decisions on what happens to everyday people. And AI and technology in the workplace are one of those. So I was lucky enough to work for a social innovation think tank back in the UK for a few years. And even 6-7 years ago, we were talking about this. So it's amazing it's now mainstream, that fear of job losses. I couldn't quite understand why people would be inventing things that mean that other people in society can't necessarily get a job and work and put food on the table for their families. And so there is that real sense of fear, I think, around it. There's also a real sense of opportunity around it. So in the workplace, if we don't have to be doing the dull tasks that we used to do, that would be great. If we could improve our capability and augment what we do, That's great. I used to work with a few social innovation companies that were looking at solving more challenges. So actually, I used to judge some awards, the Tech for Good Awards in the UK, where people were inventing things like smart walking canes for people who are visually impaired, which gave them a much greater sense of freedom and information and intelligence when walking around. And then you're like, that's amazing. You know, in terms of there's human capital in the workplace, but there's also just how do we use technology to make life better and easier for people? How can we augment the way that we live? It's not just about the job side, but I think it's a day of reckoning where I guess I used to have a side hustle called just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think with technology, there's a real sense of where are we thinking about how it's applied and the impact of how it's applied. So I'm nervous for graduates coming out of university right now in thinking, what jobs are they going to do? Are those jobs going to exist in 3 to 5 years' time? And I mean, it applies to everybody in the workforce, but I'm also particularly worried. I have 11 and a 14-year-old children. What does jobs look like there? So how we guide AI, how leaders decide right now to work, whether they're designing and developing the products, whether they're thinking about how AI can improve the performance of their organization, especially those thinking about how do they grow profitability maybe in their organization with the use of AI. That's a great question to ask. What I'd really love to know is that leaders are also asking, and what are the consequences of me doing that on the people that are within this company and the people that are impacted by this company? So it could be my customers, it could be my supply chain, it could be the people in the local community around us. So there's a huge debate. I think we've got a long time before we clean that up. We see, I think, society shifting a bit in its view on technology and how it's holding technology leaders to account. We see, I mean, I guess a quite pivotal, pretty bad act was a couple of weeks ago, last week, when someone threw a Molotov cocktail into Sam Altman's house. You know, that's a sense of people are saying, look, you're disrupting society. How do we, how do we hold you to account? I've been on webinars with Sam Altman where he said, this is above my pay grade to be, I really hope someone regulates me soon and tells me what I'm meant to be doing, because that's above my pay grade. I'm waiting to be told. And we all know that regulation's not going to catch up soon enough. So I guess when you ask the question about human capital, I think, yes, there's the conversation about people in the workforce and how this plays out in terms of technology in the workforce and jobs, making jobs better, losing jobs. It's yet to be seen. A lot of people don't quite know where that's going yet, and there's mixed stories in the press. But I think there's also just the humanity and societal side of where technology is taking the fabric of society and our opportunity in the future to be more equal and have these opportunities.
You hit on a important point, which is leaders have influence and impact. Who has been a leader that impacted you in a positive way as you think back over your journey? And flip side, not to mention names, but what have been some potholes or some negative consequences of leadership that you've observed?
It's an interesting question. I think I'm actually lucky enough that some of the leaders I worked with in my really early career are still friends 20 plus years on. They're still mentors of mine. In fact, right now they are guiding me back from the fact I've had 3 years in the US. I'm moving back to the UK, and I'm really lucky on that. They are people that have shown great, I guess, humanity. I remember one particular leader when I was a young graduate throwing myself into work in London, burning myself out in all directions, just as in your 20s you probably should, just exploring everything. And I pretty much burnt out, and he showed such kindness and never meant that feel like it was a failure. It was literally someone saying to you, you've learnt your limits here, go recover, come back. So not only did those people teach me brilliant technical trade, they also taught me the importance of the workplace in terms of the humanity of it too. So I think that's, I've been lucky enough to work with a few leaders like that, where they've given me the perspective of life in work, not just work in life. The flip question in terms of almost what I've learned I didn't want to take forward in my own leadership, and what I observed not to be great leadership. It's maybe a personal take, but I think There's quite a few people I've observed where life's been more transactional working with them. And I just sort of think in the workplace and from my experience of work, we are all humans trying to make the best life we can for ourselves. And that to me is what brings a wealthy life, right? Is the ability to have a balance in life and feel like your day to day has got some form of, for me, it's kind of adventure and curiosity and a sense of contribution in it. It's different for different people, but those leaders that have made the workplace feel really transactional is a place I've just not thrived or enjoyed being. And I kind of always promised myself that when leading others, I would make sure they were seen and that they were able to come to work in a way that they could speak up constructively. There are other ways that doesn't always work. I've learned that too. But how you can just acknowledge that people have a lot of life going on.
What did you learn from your brother, either around human potential or leadership?
Yeah, I mean, loads. I continue to learn so much from him. He's 7 years older than me, and his life as he gets older is changing into another chapter that I will age better than him. I guess is is probably, if he hears this, he'll be laughing at that. But I think all the work with the Paralympics. So I sit on the board for the British Paralympic Association. I have done for 7 years, and I sit on that because of my brother. So I grew up learning about Paralympic sport, learning about inclusion, learning about exclusion, learning far too much about exclusion, actually, and far too much about how society is unkind to those that are different and preys on them in many ways. So I guess, what did I learn from that experience, and what do I still learn every day and still learn from my work in the Paralympics is this sense of, humanity is where you are, and humanity is how those people around you behave with you. My brother achieves things that are well beyond what I could ever achieve if you put the starting line and the finish line in the same place. Does it make me a more driven person? Yes, it does. Does it mean I feel like I should keep contributing? Yes, it does. There's a real sense of, I guess, gratitude that I've had that perspective in my life. And maybe that's why I sought out the Paralympics role too, is because I've got a fierce sense of support underdogs, because often that's the way it manifests, unfortunately. A sense of don't misunderestimate what people are capable of, just because there's some myth in your head that says they're not capable, which means you find talent in really interesting places and you learn things that you didn't think you needed to learn, but you did. So so many things that I've learned. They're probably the key ones. That sense of just, you have one life, live it, make the best version of it that you can. And that's different for everybody. But that ability to strive and live that potential and contribute is special.
There's so many avenues for us to become more aware and conscious about what's possible. And often it's through relationship, it's through the interaction with one another. One of the most influential people in my life was named Lil Kirkpatrick, who taught me the most about wealth, because she had very little physical currency of wealth, but she had
Right.
this abundant mindset. And that's what we call true wealth today. And
Yeah.
thanks to her, that's what I want to help others find and discover and live in a
Yeah.
wealthy way.
Yeah.
Now, from a business standpoint, you mentioned some things about societal impact and how companies have an opportunity to really help the world and help the
Mhm.
communities that they're in. What areas do you see the most potential in that, with that direction in the world that we're in today?
It's a good question. I'm not even sure there is one key area. I think if I've learned anything, it's about trying to break it down into almost a company by company level, because the real area is, what does the leader see and what does the leader feel accountable for? What does the leader think they can do with their business? So I've also learned talking about this on a hugely macro scale makes it inaccessible for people. Looking at that sense of, actually the biggest opportunity is in every leader. Can you sort of almost prick that social conscience that says, with great power, I think as Mandela said, with great power comes great responsibility. And if you want to be a leader today, leadership is more than just the financial performance of an organization. It's a sense of, I think you said it earlier, actually, you could just replace the word leadership for influence and impact. Influence is what leadership is. So that sense of, if you become a leader, do you recognize that? Do you actually take ownership for that? It's a privilege to lead. It's not a sort of powerful top of the tree thing, although it can be that too. But there's also this sense of, if I understand what it is to lead, I have the ability to have great influence and impact. How do I want to use that? Not all leaders think like that. In fact, some leaders are really actively incentivized not to think like that, right? Through their incentive schemes, or, often if you're a publicly listed company, you might have so much pressure on you around when an economic downturn and need to explain the numbers to the board. It's really hard to find the time and the space for that. And I think we have to be honest and acknowledge that. Of all the leaders I've ever met, I don't think I've really met anyone that's a bad person that didn't want to do better. But it's a really hard environment to do better. So, it's why I wrote the book, is because I wanted to provide a space that we could have the conversation that says, this is more complex. Leadership is more complex. We are asking leaders to be stewards. We want them to be able to be stewards. So therefore, we have to help them to be stewards. I think rather than looking at it as saying, where's the greatest impact or opportunity in terms of what societal change we could create, I see it more as each organization thinking, right, so first of all, how do it's the biggest engagement factor for all workplaces, right? So it's good for business too. Employee engagement is largely driven by the relationship you have with your line manager. So, when you're a leader, how do you create a culture where people in your organization feel like they are respected and valued, and that they've got a good deal at work, and they can be engaged, they can do their best work. They should know they come to work to do their best work. That's part of the deal. As well as, if you do your best work, this is also going to be a good place for you to be. So I think anything that looks at starting with your employees, and then you think, well, what about our customers? So actually, one thing I often come to is things like, let's talk about food or healthcare. If you're leading a food or a healthcare business, or you're leading a business where the sweets that you're selling, the candy that you're selling, has certain chemicals in it that aren't great. As a leader, what do you do about that? Do you, how do you tackle that? Because you're thinking, what are you designing? What products are you designing for your customers? So you've got your employees, you've got your customers. And I think that's like an opportunity for change. Yes, it's a sellable product, but is it a product you'd want your kids to have? Is it, how do you manage that? And then you go beyond that and you can look at supply chains. How are you treating the people that you're constantly running procurement and commercial relationships with? You treat them well, the products will come well, that side of things. So all your different stakeholders, and then those within your community. There's a lot of organizations. What impact are you having on the community around you? Is it, are you drawing lots of water from the local environment, for instance, or do you rely on an awful lot of talent from the local community like a retailer would? What impact are you having? You see it a lot with, if lots of stores close, and suddenly there's so many job losses in a local community. So what role are you playing beyond just the board numbers that you're held to account for, like deeply held to account for? But how else are you accountable, and who else do you think you impact? And so for me, it's how leaders just sit and reflect on that and do what they can. There's many reasons why they can't do everything they'll want to do. And I think throwing stones at leaders isn't helpful at this time. Leadership's hard enough. And if we keep throwing stones at certain leaders, then, and by that I mean often those that put their head above the parapet and try the hardest around, whether it's sustainability or whether it's to stand for something, often are the ones that actually get the most scrutiny and the hardest time. That doesn't incentivize leaders to do more. In fact, there's trends where fewer people want to be CEOs. More CEOs are saying, I don't want to do media, I don't want to speak out, I don't want to stand for anything. It's really hard. So I think my wish is that we support those leaders, because that's how we will make the change in society, where people do have a bit more space and time to reflect on the footprint that they're leaving behind.
So if I'm hearing you, what I understand is that you're inviting leaders to be more contemplative, like have more consideration about the multifaceted aspect of their influence. You're not saying, hey, let's preserve this workforce forever because I never want to lay off someone while technology evolves and business needs definitely change. It's becoming more reflective and open and conscious as a leader. Is that a fair frame?
Yeah, that's exactly that. So it's the sense of the judgments that you're making, the decisions that you're taking. Where are you drawing on to make those decisions? Have you thought about the consequences of those decisions? You will always be upsetting someone. It's impossible to please everyone. We can't pretend that leaders cannot please all people all at once. I love the example of just, for me, BP, so the oil company, and just all the time BP is struggling with conflicting demands from stakeholders. So whether they've got all of the investors, and they've got a wide variety of investors that want returns, long-term returns on renewables, short-term returns on fossil fuels. You've got activists saying, no, you shouldn't exist. It's fossil fuels are damaging the environment. Then in the UK specifically, we have oil in the North Sea that we closed, our oil fields. Now with everything that's happening in the Middle East, we really could do with reopening those. Huge debate. Governments, regulators, environmentalists, employees. You can never please everyone. I always think that if you are BP, you probably disappoint a lot of people every day. Yet it's also a phenomenal company that if you have your pension fund in something like that, you want them to do really well. So I just use that as an example that it's really complex. Leaders can't please everyone, but that sense of just understanding who is in the system around you that you do impact. How do you prioritize that? And when you're making judgments, you're thoughtful about that. You're not just thoughtful about maybe just the numbers or just the kind of short term in the next month or two. How do I need to be? You just have that sense of I'm an economic force, but I am also a societal force. And just if I think about that and if I know that, would I do something differently or not?
I think of the phrase heavy as the head who wears the crown. And I think there's a lot of challenges and weight that leaders carry. And I'm all for supporting great leadership. Thank you for your time, Kate, the book you wrote, and contributing in a meaningful way to creating a better world.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. To discover what wealth means to you, please take our assessment at planningalt.com.